Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, That Model Railway Guy, for a brand new layout build video today, and it's something that I think a few of you might have expected was coming. So, it seems like everyone is doing their PECO 200 competition dioramas at the moment, and I'm no different. In case you've been living under a rock, as part of the Railway 200 celebrations, PECO have launched a competition for people to build little railway dioramas. There's actually two different competitions: the standalone competition, for those who want to do something sort of more self-contained, and then a modular competition to build a small section of railway on the same board, and then all of those different modules could be joined up together to create one big railway. Now, those of you who've been following the channel for a while will know that I have some experience of building modular layouts. My main 00 gauge layout is a modular layout, and as a result of that, I went for the standalone competition. Yeah, as soon as I saw the baseboard that PECO had released, I had an idea in mind straight away. But I knew I would need some help to be able to pull it off, which is where the sponsor for this mini-series, Specialist Aggregates, comes in. Now, I'll be talking more about them later on, but needless to say, I'll be using their true-to-scale range for this build, and with that, let's dive into what I have in mind.
So, first things first, I'm going to be using 009 for my diorama. This is essentially narrow-gauge trains running on N-gauge track, but the whole thing roughly matches the scale of 00. That's where the name 009 comes from, 00 gauge scale but 9mm or N-gauge track. I have a good reason for wanting to use 009 though, because I don't want my build to be a simple diorama, I want to create a complete working model railway. Some of you may remember my layout Go the Tin, which was a 009 model railway built inside of a suitcase. Because I was using 009, I was able to pack a full circuit into the small space, and because it was narrow gauge, the curves didn't look too unrealistic. This time though, I'm going to take it to a whole new level. So here's the baseboard that PECO have supplied for the competition, and it's certainly not massive. Nevertheless, I want to attempt a full circuit on this and still have some space left over for scenics. It's definitely going to be tight, but I'm confident that the Quarry Hunslets from Bachmann and the small and large Englands from PECO will be able to navigate the sharp curves, which is partly what narrow gauge is all about. It's not just going to be a simple circuit though, I do want to include a few sidings, so I've got a few points linked together here, which is where I'll start. The first job is marking where the tie bar for each point is, and this allows me to install point motors underneath the baseboard. Now, I'm not actually going to be doing that as part of this build, but I do want to leave the option open for the future. So all I have to do here is drill a 5mm hole through the surface where I've made the marks. I definitely wouldn't be able to do this after the points were installed, at least not without doing significant damage to them. Next, I'm once again using my double-sided tape method to fix down the points. This carpet tape is nice and thin, but very sticky, and so it'll have no trouble holding everything down. I open up the holes again using a knife just so that everything is ready should I want to add those point motors in the future. The points are then stuck in place, and having used double-sided tape, I can ballast these later on really easily. The rest of the track then branches out from here, and I'll tackle the right side of the main circuit first. You can see I'm putting copy decks down directly on the board, which works nice and quickly and means I won't have to bother with track pins. I'm just roughly following the curve I want the line to take, but I'm not being too specific with the whole thing. Flexible track is then joined to the point, and this stretch is bent round to form the curve. And you can see how tight this is going to end up being. I'll use some weight to hold this in position while the glue dries. Normally, Copydex is great at gripping onto the track straight away, but because that curve is very tight, naturally the track wants to spring back into a straight length again. Next, I'll use a Dremel to cut off the excess rail at the end of this stretch, just at a point where I feel it'll be convenient to join onto the next section. Another length of track is also cut to the correct length, and this will fill in the other side of the circuit. This is then glued down as well in exactly the same way. Now, some of you will have noticed that I'm not bothering with cork underlay on this build. I'm going more for speed here, but mainly I use the cork on double O gauge layouts to get a nice shoulder to the ballast. I don't feel like that's as noticeable on narrow gauge railways, and some were laid in quite a basic fashion, so that's why I'm not bothering here. So that's the entire main circuit fully laid. All I need to do now is put in the sidings. The second siding here is very close to the main line, so I'm definitely going to have some loading gauge issues here. However, this layout is most likely only ever going to have one train running on it at a time, so I don't think this will be too much of an issue, and the whole thing is really an exercise in making the most of the space. The final bit of track to install is the head shunt, which allows access to the sidings. And with that down, track laying is now complete. I do want to weather it slightly though by painting the sides of the rails. As always, I'm using Railmatch Sleeper Grime for this. There are links to this in the comments along with everything else that I've used to build this layout. Because this is such a small scene, I'm doing this by hand. Railmatch also do this colour as a spray paint as well, which would be a lot quicker. However, I used up all of the spray stuff I had doing my larger layout of Farquhar, and so I'm back to the manual method for this one. The end result is exactly the same though. It dulls down the sides of the Code 80 rails really nicely, making them look a lot finer and more realistic as a result.
Now, like I said at the start, this mini-series has been sponsored by Specialist Aggregates, and I'm going to be using their true-to-scale range quite a bit on this layout. If you're not aware already, Specialist Aggregates really are the best in the business when it comes to getting the right ballast for your layout. You know, things like the correct scale and the right colour for the location of your railway, but also just when it comes to other textures like pathways and coal yards and even just general dirt. The last few layouts I've built, I've used almost exclusively stuff from Specialist Aggregates because personally, I think their stuff is the best, but also because it's just the most easy to work with. I've used lots of other scenic textures in the past, and the amount of times it balls up or clumps together when trying to seal it with glue, it's really frustrating, and that's just simply not something that happens with the true-to-scale range. The other thing is that the guys at Specialist Aggregates really know their stuff. While their model railway range is still quite new, they provided, products like this for a wide range of uses for things like, TV and film sets. Even the European Space Agency providing artificial Mars dust for, I presume, testing out new equipment. But yeah, if that doesn't speak volumes, I don't know what does. As a side note, I've also managed to convince them to put together a special product just for this layout. I'm really looking forward to showing you that in the future. But in the meantime, please do check out their website, true2scale.co.uk. There's also links in the description to all the different products that I'm using on this layout. So yeah, if you fancy using them on your own model railway, you know where to go. And with that said, let's ballast the points.
You can see I've got some of the range from Specialist Aggregates set up behind the layout here, and I'm going to be using a good mixture of these throughout the build as I move into doing the scenics. I'm using their light grey ballast for the track, and I can add this straight to the points thanks to that double-sided tape I used to fix them down. I've made the mistake in the past of getting glue in this area, which not only gums up the points, but even when you do get it all moving again, the dried residue of the glue stops power getting through. This technique just creates a nice base layer though, and I can always build up the level of the ballast later on around some of the other sections while leaving the main mechanism free. Of course, once the ballast is sprinkled over the area, the excess can be hoovered up, leaving the bottommost layer stuck to the tape. Now, while the track is laid, nothing is actually operational yet, and I don't want this just to be a static diorama. So I'll drill some holes beside each of the rails. A wire can then be soldered to the outside faces of these, which is how I'll bring the power to the track. The excess wire is then simply fed through the hole and pulled through so that it's barely visible on top. Now you may notice I'm using blue and grey wire here for the track power rather than the red and black that I normally use, and there's a very good reason for this. I ran out of red and black wire. I mean, it's all the same, it's just a different colour on the outer plastic. With the droppers now soldered to each section of track, I can flip over the layout and you can see each wire poking through. Now to power the layout, I have an ingenious plan, and that is to use DCC-EX. I used this on my TT120 layout last year, and essentially it's an open source DCC controller made using Arduino boards. But you can also get ready-made up controllers from Chesterfield Models, and earlier this year they very kindly sent me the new updated version, the CSB1. As you can see, this is much smaller, so it'll fit perfectly to the underside of the PECO baseboard, giving me a built-in controller. And since this allows me to control the trains wirelessly through my phone, I don't need to have a physical handset to plug into the layout either. Now the CSB1 I believe is rated for 5 amps, which is actually more powerful than most other commercial DCC controllers. So it'll be more than capable of running this layout, and it costs considerably less than a normal controller too. Again, these are available from Chesterfield Models, I've put a link to them in the description, but yeah, screwed in place, the CSB1 takes up barely any space. So with all the droppers wired up to that chocolate block connection, we have power to the entire layout. And I'll clip down the loose wires just to keep everything neat. Now, because I've fitted the CSB1 controller directly to the underside of the baseboard, it means that I'll only have a single power cable to run to the entire layout, which makes this really portable and easy to set up. So let's flip the board back over again and try running a train. Naturally, I'm using the Bachmann Quarry Hunslet for this first test. A really nice loco, and I know it'll cope with the curves on this layout just fine. Using my phone, the loco moves off nice and slowly, which is great, so I've definitely got power to the track. It's great to have trains running already, and what's really nice is that despite the ridiculously tight curves, it still looks okay for a little narrow gauge railway like this. I reckon the PECO Englands will work just fine on this layout too, as they were designed by Kato, and the Japanese do like their models to be able to run round very tight curves as well. Even on such a small board though, the train is getting a really nice little run around this circuit, and it just shows that 009 really is the perfect scale when you're severely limited on space.
Obviously, the narrow gauge locos have a real unique charm to them, and as part of this series I had a bit of fun and actually designed a set of coasters featuring some of the Welsh locos. I'm going to make these available in my shop for a bit too, so if any of you are interested, please do check out the link in the description. There are 4 coasters in a pack, and each have a different loco engraved into the design on real natural slate as well, so you know, a perfect combination to show off the narrow gauge locos that ran in Wales and still do to this day. We've got the double Fairley, the small Englands, the Quarry Hunslets, and also the mainline Hunslet as well. So yeah, a nice selection, I think. Like I said, if you're interested, do check out the link. It's in the description, and they are on pre-order at the moment, just so we can judge demand. But yeah, they'll be shipping out fairly soon, so perfect for a Christmas present. Yeah, I know it's September, but you've got to get in there early, haven't you? But yeah, if you'd like to support the channel and more importantly get a cool set of coasters, please do have a look. They're great for putting a cup of tea on while you're busy running your layouts. Anyway, now that I know that the layout works, I can start turning my attention to the scenery.
I've got this narrow gauge bridge from MS Models, and this will be perfect to go over the line as it comes under the 14cm height restriction for the competition. I'll start off by painting this in a base coat of cream paint, and this is a pretty standard technique that I've used plenty of times over the years for a wide range of different stone types. This is then followed up with a very rough coat of grey over the top. And when I say this is a rough coat, I really do mean it. I want the cream to still be visible in some places, shining through the cracks and adding texture and variation to the grey from underneath. Once the grey paint is on, I then lightly dry brush some blue over the top. I've mixed this blue with a little bit of the grey just to create more of a slate colour, and these little highlights will hopefully give the impression of the bridge having been built out of slate. I then finish this all off with a black wash over everything. It looks really dramatic as it goes on, but don't worry, it does fade as it dries. What it will do though is settle in all the cracks and recesses to bring out more detail, and it will also blend the different colours together in a more muted and realistic fashion. Here's the finished result, and I'm really happy with how this has turned out. I absolutely love using the MS Models buildings and structures because the detail on them is just fantastic, and this bridge is no different. You can see I've also painted the ironwork across the top a sort of a deep blue, and I must remember to add a little bit of weathering to this at some point as well. Now the bridge will be situated in the far right corner of the layout, and my plan is to have the centre filled with a hill and a small footpath that leads down from the bridge to the railway. To create this, I'm using some spare polystyrene cut into the rough shape that I want. If you ever get any of this stuff as packaging, it's well worth saving as it's really useful for building model railway landscapes. Not to mention, it stops it going in landfill, which is always a bonus. With the hill now in place, the bridge is also glued down as well. The great thing about this hill though is it creates some separation, making it less obvious that the track is a circuit. Now you'd be forgiven for thinking that the rear side would be a non-scenic fiddle yard, but oh no, I want this layout to be scenic from every single angle. Because my polystyrene hill has a much sharper drop off here, I want to model this as if the railway is running along a really narrow ledge, much like you might see on the Festiniog or Talyllyn Railway. Effectively though, this means I'm going to be getting two very different scenes on one very small layout, which, I mean, come on, that's pretty cool, right?
Seeing as I just mentioned the Talyllyn Railway, I do actually have a discount with them at the moment to get 20% off when you book your tickets. It's actually part of my Thomas layout build that I'm doing alongside this, but I don't think they'll mind me mentioning it here as well. So yeah, if you want to get 20% off tickets to the Talyllyn Railway, there is a discount code down in the description. So just use that when you're booking your tickets. And I believe they're open up until the 2nd of November. So do make use of that if you're planning a trip in the near future. Now, as the PECO competition is celebrating 200 years of the railways, I do want to incorporate a nod to that in my scene. As many of you will know, the Welsh slate railways were some of the earliest to be built, and so I think it would be really cool to create a large heap of discarded slate.
To do this, you can see I'm gluing some card formers in place to create the basic shape of the heap. These heaps were essentially made up of all the excess slate and material that wasn't of any use, and so it was piled high up after being removed from the mines. You can still see some of these today, and they can be absolutely enormous. Now, mine won't be quite as big. Once again, I have to keep it within the height restriction for the competition, but I still want it to tower over the railway. With the basic structure in place, I then layer paper mache over the top of my card formers. Eventually, I'll be covering all of the landscape with mod rock, but that wouldn't work on the formers initially. That's because mod rock is heavier than paper mache, and so it would sag down into the gaps. Paper mache is much lighter, so it just sits on top, and when it dries, it'll create a nice shell. While that dries though, I can get to work on putting mod rock on the rest of the landscape. With the plaster bandage cut into strips, it's dipped into a bowl of water before being laid across the polystyrene hill. When this dries, it'll create a really smooth but hard and consistent surface, which will be the perfect base to add my scenics over. The paper mache has also dried now too, and so the mod rock is layered over this as well. The paper mache has done a great job of bringing out the initial shape I wanted for the slate heap, but it is quite delicate. In comparison, the mod rock is a bit more durable when it dries, so it's great to have the extra strength here. Another great thing about mod rock is that it dries relatively quickly too, and that means I can get to work painting it in a dark brown colour almost immediately. This will dull the base layer of the scenery down to an earthy mud colour, which will be a lot less noticeable. If I just left it unpainted, the white of the plaster would inevitably show through the scenics I plan to add over the top. Now that would be great if you're going for a chalky landscape, but it doesn't quite fit in with the Welsh theme that I'm going for here. I'm not just painting the hill either, any areas of exposed baseboard are also getting covered in the same brown just to keep everything nice and consistent. Now it's almost time to get the ballast down, but first I want to do a bit more weathering to the track to tone down the sleepers. Unlike on my larger build of Farquhar, I'm not treating each sleeper individually here, but going for more of a general effect. Some of the rail match paint from earlier has already given the sleepers more of a matte finish, so now I'm just using a mixture of smoke and white weathering powders from Humbrol just to bring out some of the moulded detail. I also opted to add some light rust around the check rails of the points just for something a bit extra. It's another colour to add to the layout and I think it's a nice effect. And now it's really time to crack on with the ballasting. Like with the points, I'm using the light grey ballast from True to Scale, and I'm generally just sprinkling this over the track. I know some people are very precise with how they do this, adding it using a teaspoon or other specialist devices. Personally, I have a lot less patience, and I just like to get stuck in, usually filling up the centre of the track first before building up the ballast along the edges. Running a finger through this can also help get the desired effect, and because the True to Scale range is actually made from scaled down aggregates, it leaves a little bit of a nice dusty effect. The edges are of course tidied up with a brush just to create a slightly more neat look to the railway. Being a small layout, it really doesn't take long to ballast the whole thing, and the next step would then be to glue all this down. But I think that's where we're going to leave it for today. I couldn't resist posing some locos and rolling stock on the layout though, and it's already really starting to look the part. In the meantime, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and here's a little look at what's coming up. The scenery is added, more scenery is added, and even more scenery is added.